Listen, it's good to be here today with you. It's good to be here in this space and place. And I am glad that, listen, we are here for Roughing It. That's right. Listen, this is the place where you know that we come to have our relationships improve, to have them strengthened. Listen, sometimes we have to have them remodeled, but we understand that when we come into this space and place, that listen, God begins to do a work in these areas or in these relationships that, listen, doesn't happen anywhere else. And you know, one of the things that we do here, you know how we make things happen. Listen, we begin to understand that we're not here in this space and place by ourselves. We're here in this space and place because we know that we're in relationships with others. And so, you know, one of the things that we always encourage you to do in this space and place, listen, we encourage you to be able to share. We encourage you to be able to invite. Now, listen, I'm asking that if you're watching on YouTube, that you subscribe to our YouTube channel. Hit that bell icon so that when we go live, you get those notifications. Listen, if you're here with us on Facebook, I'm asking, listen, that you would not just join us today, but listen, that you would subscribe also to our Facebook page. How do you subscribe? Listen, you hit that like button, and then listen, you hit that bell icon. Listen, so that you can follow us, you can make sure that when we go live on Facebook, that you're here with us also. And you know, we always like to say like, share, and follow. That's right, like, share, and follow. And so, listen, we thank you so much for being here today. Listen, we thank you so much, listen, for joining us here for Roughing It. Now, listen, I've got some things I want to talk to you about today. And because I've got some new things I want to talk to you about today, let us go ahead and begin to get started as we are moving into what we're talking about today, which is relationship baggage. That's right. Listen, we're talking about relationship baggage. Now, here's the reality. That when we talk about relationship baggage, that listen, everybody comes to the table with some luggage. That's right, listen, everybody comes to the table with some luggage. The question is, or am I say, it doesn't matter whether you have Louis Vuitton or listen, you have some Ross baggage. The outside, the packaging of it doesn't really matter. What really matters is what's on the inside of that baggage. That's right, what's on the inside of that baggage. And because, listen, we're here today to be able to uncover, unwrap, and more importantly, to be able to unpack this whole idea and concept around relationship baggage. I'm telling you, listen, we've got some things that we really need to jump into today. And because, listen, we have some things that we need to jump into today, listen, I am looking forward to us being able to do just that. Now, you know, usually I will have a presentation where I put slides and that sort of thing on the screen. We won't have that today, but listen, we will hopefully jump back into that kind of format here on the next time. So I just need for you to really listen into some things that I'm going to be sharing with you today. And so once again, if you have any questions, you can put those on the Facebook page. You can put those on the YouTube channel. I can see both of those right here before me. And so I just want to thank you for joining us. And listen, here's the first thing that I want to ask you. When we talk about relationship baggage, the question is why baggage matters. That's right. Why does it even matter? But even before we go there, listen, I got a quote for you by Gina Baraka, and she says this. She says, my therapist helped me learn to understand that if you don't unpack your own emotional baggage, it's no longer baggage, it's dead weight. Oh, listen, it's worth me saying that again. Listen, Gina says, my therapist helped me to learn, has helped me to learn to understand that if you don't unpack your emotional baggage, it is no longer baggage, it's dead weight. And so here, I always like to use a passage from the Word of God, from the Bible, because here we're not just talking about just what affects us mentally or emotionally, but we're also here to talk about how this impacts us spiritually. And so here in Proverbs 17, verse 17, in the New King James Version, it reads this. It says, a friend loves at all times, and a brother is born for adversity. It says that a friend loves at all times, but a brother is born for adversity. When we think about friendships in our lives, often we think about those that bring a certain level of comfort to us. We think about those that are able to encourage us. We're thinking about those that are able to give us reassurance. But when the scripture is talking about a brother, it says that a brother is born for adversity. We understand that we also have sometimes those in our lives, we don't always embrace them. But there are those that are in our lives that, listen, they really challenge us. They really help us to push beyond our comfort zone. And these are the ones that often help us to grow. If you're not aware, but our daughter recently experienced a surgery because she had tore her ACL. And because she tore her ACL, which is there in your knee, she had to have this surgery. Matter of fact, that was why we weren't here last Thursday, because I was with her there at the surgery center when she was having this operation done. And one of the things that is interesting is that she has a new physical therapist. And this new physical therapist has basically said, listen, I have zero tolerance for excuses. I have zero tolerance for being late. Just, hey, I'm all about the business. Well, let me tell you, this physical therapist is pushing my daughter, getting her to do things beyond her comfort level. I tell you that this physical therapy is probably like what the scripture says, a brother that is born for adversity. It is those persons that are in our lives that we don't always embrace, that we don't always enjoy, but they're the ones that push us beyond our comfort zone. And so today, as we are diving into unpacking our baggage, listen, there may be times that you may feel like I'm a friend. And there may be times that you feel like I am a brother. But I am telling you, I am here to not just encourage you, but I am here to also push you, because I want you to live life lighter and not have all of this unnecessary baggage that you're carrying around. It's funny when you think about our lives, our lives are like taking a journey. It's like taking a trip. And when we take a trip, listen, when we take a trip, we think about where we're going. When we take a trip, we're thinking about how we're going to get there. Am I flying? Am I driving? Am I taking the train? We're thinking about what is it that I am going to take with me? Well, here when we're on this life's journey, we have to think about the baggage that we have with us on this journey. And so what I'm saying to you today, and listen, whether you're watching this on the live or you're watching this on the rebroadcast, here's what I'm sharing with you today, is that it doesn't matter whether you're in a new relationship or whether you've been with the same person. Whether we're talking about a marriage, we're talking about a family. Listen, we're talking about a colleague. You've been working at the same place and you have developed these long-term relationships with people over the years. Doesn't matter whether you're in a new relationship or you are in a relationship that has been there for the last 10, 15, 5, 20 years, the emotional baggage that you and I bring into a relationship has been there since the beginning. Now, sometimes it's not always known, sometimes it's not always revealed, but it doesn't mean that it's not present. And because that emotional baggage has been present, because that emotional baggage has been there, listen, for some of us, we are aware of what that looks like. For some of us, listen, we are not aware of it. But I would tell you that often those that are around us, those that have entry beyond the surfacey parts of who we are, they usually see it. They may not be able to describe it. They may not be able to challenge you on it. But I promise you, most of the time, they're the ones that know about it. Why? Because sometimes in these areas of our lives, it's what we call blind spots. It is sometimes those areas where, like when you're driving and there's a certain point where a car is on your side, but because it's in your blind spot, you can't see it. Doesn't mean that it's not there. Doesn't mean that it doesn't have potential to create harm and problems. And so therefore, we have these blind spots. And what happens is that along the way of living, along the way of being a child and being a teenager and being an adult, we inevitably pick up some things along the way. And so by the time that you and I have reached adulthood, there's this baggage that we've acquired along the way. And because we have acquired this baggage along the way, listen, sometimes this can affect our intimacy, the kind of vulnerability that we have in these up and close personal relationships. Listen, sometimes it can affect, the friendships. It can impact the kind of professional relationships that we have with people. Listen, they may not know us up close and personal, but it doesn't mean that these things are not occurring in the exchange and in the dynamics of us having a relationship with them. And so therefore, it's important that you and I begin to understand the baggage that we're carrying, the baggage that is a part of these relationships, the baggage that you and I have. And so my first thing would be to help you to identify what is relationship baggage. What is relationship baggage? Listen, it is the difficult and painful things that we've gone through in a relationship that tends to follow us into a future relationship. Let me say that again. It is the difficult and painful things we've gone through in a past relationship that tend to follow us into future relationships. It is sometimes a collection of artifacts of past experiences. It is what some people would call unresolved emotional turmoil. Now listen, this turmoil could have been caused by trauma, whether it was in our childhood, it was in our teenage years, maybe it was something that happened early on. Listen, it could have been something that happened just recently. But whether it was trauma, whether it was abuse, whether it was sometimes just negative experiences from the past, the reality is that we have been in relationships that have caused significant impact, that has sometimes harmed us to the point that it has left a mark, it has left an issue, it has left something that is lingering in our lives. And so therefore, it has become baggage. Listen, there's some that describe this as what we would call unfinished business. It is something that started at some point in my life. And because I did not bring closure to that area, I did not finish what was started. I have some unfinished business that I need to address. And so therefore, listen, it is impossible for you and I to get through life and to not have at some point some heartbreaks, at some point some pains and some turmoil, at some point some kind of thing that has affected you and I so much that you and I are not able, listen, you and I are not able to just kind of move past it, although it may have felt or been sometimes what we consider to be insignificant. The mark and the pain and the devastation that it has left in our lives has been such a scar that, listen, it is following us in all of these other relationships. And so sometimes when it comes to this kind of unpacking, when it comes to this kind of baggage, some people will wonder, is it even helpful? Should I even go there? Should I even uncover and unravel all of this? I remember that there was a person who was coming to see me for therapy. And, they recognized at first, like, hey, I recognize the benefits and I recognize what all, I can come out of this. And so they were excited and thrilled at first. And then as time went on a little longer, and it was time for them to actually arrive for their appointment, they called and canceled. And they said to me, I don't want to deal with all of this. Because they said, I recognize that in order for me to get better, I'm going to have to dive back into some things that I really don't want to revisit. And so as much as it was long-term success and relief, the temporary struggle of having to uncover and unravel and to readdress these injuries and these issues and these particular emotional pains, the person felt like it was going to not be worth the outcome. And sometimes people will say, well, ignorance is a bliss, and they would just rather just not uncover, not deal with these things, and just allow them to just run its course. But the reality is that pain has a way of expressing itself. Let me say that to you again. Listen. Pain has a way of expressing itself. Listen, your emotions want to express themselves. And if they cannot express themselves in a healthy way, they will express themselves in an unhealthy way. And so therefore, listen, headaches, when you and I have what we call stressful thinking, listen, you will begin to have headaches. It is pain trying to express itself that it needs a way to be relieved. And if it cannot find a healthy outlet, it will choose an unhealthy expression. So whether you talk about headaches or you talk about anxiety and worry, enough of that over an amount of time can create ulcers in your stomach. Pain has a way of expressing itself. Listen, you can hold on to anger to the point that it turns into bitterness, but I would tell you that pain has a way of expressing itself. And so now anger and bitterness can turn into, listen, arthritis. It can turn into also ulcers. Why? Because pain wants to express itself. And when it does not have a healthy way, it will choose an unhealthy route. And so it is always in our best interest to be willing to unpack the baggage, to unpack and to revisit and to deal with the things that are plaguing our current relationships. Now, once again, listen, if you have questions, you can put those on our Facebook page or on our YouTube channel. And so here, listen, we want to begin today to talk about unpacking our baggage. Listen, we want to use it in such a way, listen, that it expands our awareness and improve our relationships. Listen, it's taking a hard look, which can sometimes be hurtful at first, but it is the kind of thing that, listen, has long-term relief if we're willing to stick to the process long enough to get to the point where we find that there is relief on the other side. Listen, it requires a willingness to take a hard look at ourselves. And let me just tell you that in this process of taking a hard look at yourself, at myself, it is not always something that we can easily do in the beginning, but it is something that we can become skillful at doing over time. And so listen, it is not for you and I to beat up on ourselves. It is not for you and I to degrade and to put ourselves down. Listen, to look at now we may see some things that we don't like. We may see some things that are not as appealing, but the goal is not to do more damage. The goal is to really uncover, how did that get there? What happened to cause this to land in our luggage? And so therefore, listen, it is going to help us to have better awareness. Listen, it is so that we don't beat up on ourselves, listen, or even try to come to the point of exhaustion. Because listen, we come to a place that where we can't undo what has been done, but we can undo the effects that it has continued to linger in our lives. And so therefore, listen, this is why I want you to understand that I am here to sometimes be a brother, and I am here sometimes to be a friend. And so listen, not only does it bring out an awareness of ourselves, but listen, it also brings out an awareness of our relationships. At some point, we have to be accountable for how we have allowed this to continue in our lives. Now, we may not be responsible for it landing, but listen, we are definitely responsible for its removal. And because we're responsible in that regard, we've got to recognize that this is adult conversation. This is adult level acceptance. This is not, listen, for you and I to point the fingers and to blame and to shame, whether it's ourselves or it's someone else. It is the recognition that there are some issues here that need to be addressed. And you cannot any longer allow these things to just remain and to not do something about them. So here are some things that baggage will help us to address. Baggage helps us to address. Let me point out some things that baggage will help us to address. One, it will help us to address core beliefs. What are some core beliefs that we have about ourselves? What are some core beliefs that maybe we have about people in general? Maybe what are some core beliefs that we have about relationships? Now let me give you an example. Let's say you, myself, or maybe somebody else has a core belief that you never tell anyone anything that can hurt you. It's like this is like Fort Knox. No one has access. No one will ever have access. Listen, no one can ever know about this. And here's what happens. If anyone has this kind of core belief. Now, I'm not saying that we're not careful and cautious. I'm not saying that we just put everything out there to anybody and everybody. But the other side of this is the healthiness of being able to be vulnerable, being able to find those that are trustworthy, being able to find those in which I can have the kind of intimacy to where they have access to information that is not necessarily surface information. It's not just information that anybody can access. But if I hold to this, it is usually because at some point, somewhere along the way, I was deeply hurt. I was deeply scarred. I was somehow deeply impacted by either somebody telling something that I didn't want them to tell, or somehow I revealed something to somebody and they went and spilled the beans to somebody else. I'm telling you that if you have ever had a kind of core belief that says, listen, never ever tell anybody anything that can hurt you, listen, it will rob you of intimacy in relationships. Listen, this is the kind of thing that will cause you to not be vulnerable. This is the kind of thing that will cause you to lack trust. And listen, and when you talk about significant relationships, I'm not talking about relationships that are just acquaintances and associates. I'm talking about those on the inner circle. If this kind of core belief is what I acquired somewhere along the way, then I recognize this is baggage. This is a core belief that really holds me back versus launches me forward. But this is the kind of core belief, listen, that has surrounded or insulated me from being able to protect myself from having any kind of injury in the future. And although it is my attempt to protect myself from being hurt again, the reality is that this is an unhelpful core belief. It reminds me of, listen, let me see this. I'm looking for this note that I had made. I will actually, I will bring that up later. So one of the things that baggage will help you and I to do is to become aware of core beliefs. Another thing that baggage will do, it will help us to identify relationship patterns. It will help you and I to identify relationship patterns. It's the ways in which, or the templates in which we relate to people. There are ways in which we relate to people that are just basic. It has no real significance, like, for example, how I relate to people is I may say yes, sir, and yes, ma'am. I make sure that I greet them. I look them in their eyes. Those are maybe good characteristics that we have that doesn't really maybe have any kind of baggage with them. But then there are relationship patterns that, listen, they can have baggage. An example I would like to give you is, let's say you take somebody that has a caregiver type characteristic when they are interacting with people. This is the kind of person, listen, that they have a tendency, and this is where it can become unhelpful, and this is where it can be like a baggage. They have a tendency to always want to fix people. Although it is their good heart's intention to take care of somebody, to maybe improve something in somebody's life, the reality is that they have this need to fix people. And although this can come from a good place and it can have a healthy balance, there's another side where this can become so unhelpful that it can become like a baggage. And so this is where, listen, somebody that has this kind of caregiving spirit about them, or they have this caregiving characteristic, listen, this is the kind of person that, listen, will force themselves to help a person, whether the person wants to help or not. And sometimes in friendships and sometimes in these relationships on the job, listen, you're trying to force somebody to change that sometimes don't want to change. You ever seen sometimes when you're in the airport that somebody, obviously has a lot of luggage with them for whatever reason, and maybe you were one of those persons, or maybe you've seen one of those persons try to offer help to them, and they're like, no, I got it. And you can tell like they're overwhelmed. Sometimes they're sweating. Lady may have on makeup. She's her mascara is running, and you're like, I can tell that you're overwhelmed. I can tell that like you need help. But the reality is that they don't want any. They do not want any help. And sometimes as a person that is a caregiver, sometimes we're in relationships. Now, this is a relationship pattern I'm talking about, where you just have a tendency to just want to fix things. You just want to fix this in their life. You see this problem in this other friend's life. You see this problem in a family member's life. You see this problem in a colleague's life. And you're just wanting to fix these things. Maybe good intentions. but it could be bad behavior. And sometimes that could be coming from a bad place. And so therefore we've got to recognize that this can be baggage. And because this can be baggage, we may need to have some kind of awareness around this, because maybe we're actually pushing people out of our lives because we keep trying to fix things they don't want fixed. And sometimes that's tough to hear and sometimes that's tough to recognize, but that's a reality. And so you become pushy, you become this person that, when they are saying, hey, I don't want your help, or maybe they aren't saying it, but how they're reacting to you, you feel like it's a turnoff. And listen, you're doing more damage than good because you're trying to fix things in people's lives that they never asked for you to touch. I gave that as an example, as a relationship pattern. Maybe that's not your issue, but it could be another issue in which you're not aware that there is this baggage that you're bringing into these relationships. And therefore, I'm wanting you to understand that it can show up in core beliefs. What do I believe about people? What do I believe about myself? What do I believe about relationships? Or these relationship patterns? How am I interacting with people? Another area where sometimes baggage can show up is where we need to grow and develop. See, relationships are meant to serve as a womb and a crucible. And what I mean by that is it is a place where we are to grow. But listen, it is also a place of where we are to become stronger. But growth is not always comfortable. See, there are times in which I've heard people, I've counseled with people, and they're saying things like, well, I'm just not happy in this relationship. But the reality is that sometimes they're looking for the other person to make them happy versus them taking responsibility for their own happiness. And so sometimes the reality is that when you and I are needing to grow and you and I are needing to develop, sometimes it is because we have this baggage that we're carrying around that is literally limiting our growth and development. Because sometimes relationships serve as a womb, and they also serve as a crucible. See, a crucible is a place where we grow and a place where we become stronger. But like I said, growth is not always comfortable. Here's the last place that I want to highlight when we talk about relationship baggage. When we talk about relationship baggage, one of the ways in which we sometimes bring baggage into a relationship is when we have to look at our wounds. That's right, our wounds. I'm not talking about your physical wounds. I'm talking about your mental and your emotional, those psychological wounds. That word wounds come from the Greek word trauma. And so here we're talking about sometimes trauma that has happened in our lives. It's where harm has been done to a person psychologically, whether it was an event or whether it was a series of ongoing situations and scenarios. It traumatized you. Sometimes as kids, we've gone to school and the kids picked on us and the kids said different things and called us names. And as much as we sometimes said, well, sticks and stones may break my bones, but those names will never hurt me. The reality is that they did. The reality is that sometimes we didn't get over those things. As much as we became adults and recognized that kids could do and say different things and not necessarily mean them, the reality is the pain of what they said has lingered, and it has affected our self-esteem. It has affected our confidence. It has affected our self-identity. And so therefore, listen, we have been traumatized. And because we have been traumatized, sometimes we've even been diagnosed or need to be diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder. That's where, listen, we've had so much distress in this area, or we've had so much distress in this situation that when we find ourselves in similar situations, in similar scenarios, that listen, it begins to trigger us. And listen, and when it begins to trigger us, it's not so much about what is happening now as much as it reminds us about what happened before. And so it is now like we're reliving that initial experience, except it's compounded. And so I have more pain, I have more trauma, I have more anger, I have more hurt, I have more pain. And this is lingering in my life. It's baggage. And so now I take that into a relationship, and before you know it, this person is maybe interacting with me in a positive way, but it reminds me of something negative, and so therefore it's triggering old wounds. And that is nothing more than what we call baggage. And so unless I begin to really take a look at myself, unless I begin to really look at these areas of what I truly believe, core beliefs, I begin to take an inventory of my wounds. How aware are you of the trauma that happened in your life? How honest are you about the trauma that has happened in your life? And so, if we're not, then what's happening often is that we're reacting to situations in which the current person really has very little to do with, and it has more to do with that original scar, that original hurt, that original pain, that unresolved issue, that unfinished business in my life. And so now I'm in a relationship, and this person reminds me of my mother in a negative way. I'm in a relationship, and this person reminds me of my dad in a negative way. I'm in a relationship, this person reminds me of some childhood bully. And this person has no idea of the connection of what they are doing, saying, or not saying. And it is doing nothing more than hitting on that wound and triggering all of these other negative emotions. And before you know it, I'm now reacting to this person. But really, my issue is with this person of old. You can take this with somebody that was in a relationship, and let's say somebody cheated on them. You take a romantic relationship and somebody cheated on them. Listen, they can become so distrusting and so protective that, listen, they don't allow anybody but so close in their lives, because their idea is that I don't want to be hurt again. But the reality is that it's an unhealthy protective mechanism that they have insulated themselves with, because they are trying to avoid the pain. But the reality is that they aren't addressing the wound. And when anytime you have a wound in the physical side that goes unaddressed, we know that we are much more vulnerable for infection. We are much more vulnerable for that wound taking longer to heal and to be not just heal, but to listen, even for the scab to even cover that area. I've got to give treatment. And often what has happened is that we have been in relationships, and we have allowed these wounds to go on and on and on. And now they have turned into nothing more than just infections that have gone bad. And infections, after a while, listen, can allow disease and all kind of sickness in our body, simply because they've gone untreated. And so, listen, while we're here in this time talking about relationship baggage, I need for you to understand that, listen, it can show up as wounds. It can show up in core beliefs. You just have some unhealthy way of thinking and assessing and looking at things. Listen, it can come in relationship patterns. How do I relate to people? Am I relating from a healthy perspective? Am I relating from an unhealthy perspective because I'm trying to avoid having that kind of pain again? I'm telling you that relationship baggage was never meant to be taken on a long trip. It was for you to be able to collect it, see it for what it's worth, deal with it, and be able to move forward. And I'm telling you that, listen, over this time that we're going to be talking about relationship baggage, I'm going to be helping you to unpack your bags so that you might know how you can, listen, that's right, listen, so that you might know how you can live lighter in the relationships that you currently, listen, you are currently in right now. If you and I will be honest, if you and I would take a real look at ourselves and take a real inventory, you and I will begin to recognize that there's some baggage that we have. There are some things that we need to address. But if we are intentional, and I promise you, if you stick here throughout this next series of different things that we're going to be teaching on as it relates to baggage, listen, you can lighten your load. Listen, you can address that wound. And I promise you, you can live life on a lighter load, and your relationships can be much more fulfilling. And listen, they can be much more enjoyable. And listen, and you're not always attacking and reacting and so defensive. Listen, this makes it difficult to have real, honest, difficult conversations when you're not aware of this baggage. And I'm telling you that it limits you. Listen, it'll limit you in promotions. Listen, it'll limit you in opportunities. You're older in age, but you're immature in emotions. You're immature in thinking. And simply because you are an adult doesn't mean that you're grown in all these other internal areas of your life. That's right, listen. A friend and a brother is who I am to you today, so that you might be a better friend, a better sister, a better brother, a better mother, a better father, a better coworker, a better colleague. Because when you get better, listen, every other relationship has the opportunity to get better too. So listen, I want to let you know that I thank you for being here with me today. I thank you for being here with Pastor and Therapist Marcus Ruffin. I thank you for, listen, staying here for this relationship baggage series that we're going to be on. And so listen, as you are here with us, listen, we're going to be unpacking some things. And I hope that you're willing, listen, to endure the unpacking process so that by the time this trip is over, your luggage will be lighter, and listen, and you will be brighter because you're much more aware of what it means to have baggage, but more importantly, how to unpack it. Listen, I thank you for being here. I look forward to seeing you again next Thursday as we will continue as we talk about relationship baggage. Listen, you be blessed, and you have a much more maximizing, fulfilling relationship. I see you soon.